Hello. Welcome to this webinar with the Sunday Times. My name is Sam Mkokeli. I'm from Mkokeli Advisory. I'm also a journalist. This event today has been brought to you by Mkokeli Advisory, the Sunday Times, the Institute for Global Dialogue, and also MISTRA, a fascinating think tank in Johannesburg that has put together a very compelling book about coalitions. And today we're talking about coalitions because we have an election coming up. And it seems that coalitions are a big part of the conversation already. We thought we would gather everybody around here. We get to learn about coalitions, how long we've had them. It seems they are as old as democracy itself. And we've rounded up powerful speakers that will help us look at coalitions, the good, the bad, the funny, and the outright nasty. Here's a lineup for you, and it's fascinating. We're going to start and hear from Abba Elma Yakub, a former diplomat and a great South African, wonderful man to hear from. Abba is going to be followed by a panel. This panel is led by Professor Susan Boyson, somebody I've known for years from my alma mater at UPE, and she taught politics, and she understands South Africa very well. She speaks with authority, and she'll be followed by Mkokeli Advisory, also somebody who needs no introduction when we're discussing South African leadership, politics, and issues of public concern. Bonola Mahale follows, and Crispian Olva, Amuzweni Ngoma, Terry Talialane, Johann Mettler. It's a powerful lineup for you. They will unpack all these issues in a way that will help us have better conversations about South Africa and the elections we are facing. Welcome. Make sure that you do raise your questions. We'll have a chance to put them across through the chat and make sure that the experts get to respond to your questions. And you also feel free to tweet about this event and the webinar held by the Sunday Times with MISTRA, the IGD, Mkokeli Advisory. Thank you very much. And then I'm going to call on Abba to give us a broad introduction to the topic and issues related to coalitions and the state of the nation. Thank you, Abba.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks to you and your colleagues at Sunday Times and Arena for having organized this event. I think, as you said, it's very timely, very compelling, compulsive, and compulsory reading for everybody who's concerned about the future of South Africa and to understand the nature of politics in this country. Our coalitions book is the most recent publication that the Mapungubwe Institute released, and it's really archetypal of the kind of work that MISTRA does. One is it takes a long-term view, it's strategic research, and in that sense, it couldn't be more timely given the local government elections coming up. We hope that all political parties, all media, everybody that's interested in what's happening at the local level will be looking at that. It also takes a look at the long term, because I think there are some really critical questions that are raised in this publication. And I think as South Africans, we need to be grappling with these. How do we ensure that we continue maintaining an effective democracy whilst delivering in the interests of people? Because, as you know, this book deals with a part of government where people often say that's when the tire hits the road, or the rubber hits the road. So I think that's the other key element that we need to keep in mind about the significance of the book. It deals with relevant local examples in depth by people who understand the nitty-gritty of the politics of that area, and it's incredibly rich in that sense. But at the same time, it also reflects on international examples, comparative case studies, and so forth. And I think for those of us that are involved on the conceptual strategic side, it also deals with some of the concepts that we need to be understanding and so forth. So before I hand over, as I often say, I'm the pretty face at these kind of events. The real gray cells are the guys that are men and women who'll be speaking to you now. They're the real content drivers of the work we do. I just come in, cut ribbons, and make a few opening remarks. But I'm looking forward to the engagement. I think it's going to be a rich engagement. We've got an incredible group of the authors, but also respondents, people who were not part of authors, but who are as adept, as familiar with the issues that the book raises. And I look forward to hearing from all of them. Most importantly, I want to once again thank Amuzweni and Professor Susan Boyson for the leadership they have given the project and for the energy that they have brought in making sure that this book is promoted through the length and breadth of this country. Looking forward to the engagements. Thank you, Sam. Over to Professor Susan Boyson.
Oh, thank you very much. My apology for that, colleagues. It is my pleasure to show that this is our book, Mr. And thank you very much to everybody who helped make this event happen and to all the main panelists there. Thank you very much, colleagues. This is about coalitions politics in South Africa, the future of coalition politics in South Africa, which is in many ways the future of politics in South Africa. In the African and broader international contexts that help us understand how these politics, this type of politics unfolds. And of course, the African National Congress is the pivot. And that is my first chapter, the first chapter in this book, pivot around which coalition politics hinges. If the ANC recovers to former levels of electoral performances, then we know there's a minimal prospect of future coalitions increasing. However, we know that the ANC is in this gray zone of coalitions pending, more of them probably in the offing. In the zone where the ANC still overall in elections coming out overall absolute majorities 50% plus, except in those roughly 30 or so municipalities over a series of elections. And so much hinges therefore on this ANC and how this jagged curve of its up and down decline and slight improvements here and there, how long that recurs as a jagged curve. And when do we see, are we going to see a general slide to below 50% support? And that is where recent opinion poll, for example, the one by Mark Ipsos, and suggested the ANC could be below 50%. But we also know these are early days in election campaigns, and we know how the parties can really rev up their campaigns and make things happen better for them. But to coalition politics, it is a very difficult form of government, very often highly unstable, and very often characterized by more party politics and contests between political parties at another forum, not in elections anymore, but now in coalition governments. It ends up very often being a contest, continuous contest between political parties. And that's what makes it so very unstable. The fact that coalition politics is seen by political parties as inter-party war by another means. And that has the implication that coalition politics in South Africa, unlike many other parts in the world, but definitely not all parts of the world, but unlike many parts of the world, is a very unstable form of governance. Coalitions have their life cycles, and at so many points in that cycle, parties can enter or especially exit almost to their heart's desire. One can argue, and some of my colleagues will be referring to that, unless they're tied together by a coalition agreement that could help stabilize that agreement. But we have also seen in our relatively short history of coalition politics in South Africa that coalition agreements can be disregarded and torn up without any value being attached to that. It's often argued that ideological coherence help political parties cohere and stand together in their coalitions much better, that those coalitions have a better chance to succeed. However, that is not necessarily the case. We have seen very diverse coalitions, ideologically diverse coalitions in South Africa. Sometimes they have been relatively stable, in other cases, definitely not. And then we know that ideology is often not a very strong component of coalition governments. And the only ideology, if I may call it an ideology, often that holds these parties together is that of power and privilege and wealth of very elitist group of people participating in those coalitions, those ones who have been negotiating and formalizing those coalitions. So that is not necessarily a guarantee that those coalitions will be maintained. And this is the final chapter in this book that shows all the elements that hang together and help build possibilities of these coalitions being prolonged into the future, or are them just being a very unstable form of governance. And then one can also ask, what have the politics of the last 2 weeks in South Africa brought about in a way of affecting future coalition politics? Of course, the ANC as governing party is also a porous party, and that is not good for stable coalitions being formed, because that can really lead to a great amount of fragility. And we have seen the ANC really demonstrating that it is not, it's maybe still a colossus, maybe still about 50% of support, but it is not strong, and it's often not a very coherent coalition partner to other political parties. And that makes that the parties can come on board on different kinds of agendas, whether it is control of certain portfolios and access to resources and patronage that may be accompanied by that, or simply by bolstering the ANC and defeating opposition by another means. And so that was a very important part that's very relevant for coalition politics. And of course, we can also argue that we've seen much in the public narratives, that the IEC is now part of party politics and that it is helping the ANC resuscitate itself. Of course, it is not, I don't believe that is the case. I think the Constitutional Court should rather be asked that question as to why it had left open that possibility of legal interpretations of the very summative ruling, 2-page ruling that was given last Friday, and left that space for the IEC to come in to have to interpret the exact mandate and directives that were given in that ruling. So yes, and the opposition parties obviously are upset, and the prospects for more and more coalitions have dwindled since that directive was given by the Constitutional Court. Opposition parties, no doubt, are quite upset because they see a chance, a big windfall of gains disappearing under their feet. Yes, so that has had a big impact on the prospects for coalition politics. And then to conclude, this really also had implications for participation. Hapless and embarrassing as that the ANC, the relative implosion of the last few weeks have been, it had a stabilizing effect on elections, because a lot of exclusions would have happened from those elections had the ruling not gone this direction, in the sense that many parts would have been, many constituencies, enclaves here and there, not wall to wall across the country, would have been excluded, and that these parties would have had chance to destabilize or for their supporters to question the legitimacy in those local government elections, because local government elections already suffer from relatively low political participation, often not lower than in the rest of the world, but relatively low and lower than national politics. And we find that those politics become informalized. If it's not channeled through elections, it's informalized. It goes into different directions, different layers of politics. And that can very often lead to destabilization. And I think July's riots were quite a good illustration of what happens if politics are not channeled through those acceptable trajectories. Yes, and then a very important question, which I'm sure we shall address in the rest of the discussion, is the interface between this politics that I've been talking about and governance, and how stable governance happen or not, and how coalitions can really have a direct impact on the type of mandate that the parties pursue on the voters, and that it has to be on governance and not politics in the first place, and that would be a good way to stabilize the politics. And those examples, thank you very much, many of them internationally. Thank you very much, Sam.
Thank you so much, Prof. And we'll move very swiftly to Professor Ndlechana. Over to you, Professor Ndlechana, UJ.
Thank you, Sam. Well, there's a lot that one can say on the subject, but I know you've been very strict, at least in our briefing, about time. So I'll say a few things as a teaser, I guess, and many other things will be discussed later. The first thing is that a lot has been happening with local government coalitions, so it has kind of attracted disapproval, as if it's something that you can wish away or you can remedy somewhat. I think what we need to understand is that this is an inevitable outcome of our politics, nature of our politics, nature of our societies. So it won't disappear. I think we have to invest time, especially parties, to see how they make coalitions work. And there are a couple of things that determine really, or rather a major reflection for me, and perhaps two other things that I'll come to. A major cause or a major reflection of coalitions that it reflects the comparativeness of our politics, especially because if you look at the history, say going back to 2000, they have largely been concentrated in two provinces. They have subsequently spread around, with the exception of Mpumalanga, but largely concentrated in two provinces, the Western Cape and KZN. And that there is an indication, tells you that those two provinces obviously have had two dominant parties, IFP, ANC, ANC, DA, and DPDA later on. So you didn't have one dominant party, so to speak. And also the kind of coalition actors, coalition partners, differed, for instance, from one province to the other, still on those two provinces. In the Western Cape, especially in the small towns of George, Knysna, Canaland, Beaufort West, you've had community organizations acting pretty much as kingmakers. And then these were folks who were part of the UDF, for instance. And then with the onset of professionalization of politics, for instance, they had to decide whether they pursue professional careers or they remain activists. Unfortunately, remaining within politics did not necessarily offer careers, because parties can only offer a certain number of positions. And so these folks use their previous involvement in the ANC. These are people who had built a credible reputation. For instance, most of them used to work in NGOs, legal advisory centers, this and that. So these are folks who had built credibility within their own neighborhoods. So they tended to stand, then they would form a community organization. And this marks the transition actually from activism to professional career life. These were career politicians now, right? So they set up these NGOs, these community organizations, they participate, and they would win a couple of votes and enough though to be elected into council. But because they had become career politicians, so they're always looking for opportunities. They're always looking for a moving bus, right? And some of them, because these parties or community organizations will also gain a few seats, there would be squabbles among themselves as to who should get the seat. And if the one other guy or two guys don't get the seat, they move they move on to form yet their own party. So career politics. Politics as a source of livelihood then creates these rivalries. People using their own credibility to set themselves up as councillors. In KZN, you had parties there acting as kingmakers pretty much, and in KZN, that comparativeness and the emergence of other actors in coalition politics was a function of instability within parties, specifically in the IFP. The IFP breaks up, or there's a split in 2006 with Zibachiane forming IDECO, for instance. Then in 2011, there's yet another split by the late Makwaza Msibi forming NFP. And it's also quite interesting the kind of resources, and this is what the IDECO example tells us. For instance, the kind of resources that party use to get the kind of coalition that they seek to get. The ANC, especially in the instance of Zibachiane, the IDECO was a kingmaker, obviously, in about 3 municipalities, deciding the balance of power between the IFP and the ANC. And at the time, Zibachiane just was also in business running a bus transportation company. And the ANC, his contract for that business was about to be renewed or was about to expire. So in order to renew the contract, they said he must vote with the ANC. Otherwise, he won't get the contract. So the ANC used control of provincial government to get the kind of partner that it wanted to get. But Zibachiane ran into problems because the other guys in the party were not in favor of setting up this coalition with the ANC. So they refused to go along, and as a result of that, the party broke down and there was another split. So, I mean, there are quite a number of these factors that come into play when coalitions are made, but we'll discuss that later on. Let me pause there for now. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Prof. I'm looking forward to more nuggets. I think there was a hint in previous events in the book about the nature of the kind of leaders that come through. DJs, the ordinary DJ becoming an important player in our city life. And moving now to Bunolo Mahale. Bunolo is at the University of Pretoria at the Democracy and Civic Engagement Unit under the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria. Bunolo, over to you.
Thank you, Sam. Good afternoon, everyone. I've always wanted to say this. I authored chapter 11 there. I said it. I'm just going to make a brief reflection on the chapter and how it applies to the upcoming local government elections. My chapter examines the nature, the rationale, and the challenges of coalition politics in Johannesburg municipality. It takes the absence of willingness by political parties to compromise as an indication of competitive power play. And as an attempt to understand the nature of coalition, the chapter focuses on the rationale behind its formation. It asks whether was it to bring great administrative and political cohesion and effective governance, or was it an attempt to gain executive power in the interest of political parties and individual leaders? It first assessed that ideological orientation, identity, and policy divergence are some of the key challenges that befell Johannesburg municipality. Of course, the destabilizing role of the EFF as a queen maker, because I'm a feminist, I'll call it a queen maker, unlike Prof. Metani, who was referring to it as a king maker. So this destabilizing role of the EFF underpinned the eventual collapse of the coalition. Now, I just want to briefly reflect on the rationale of the formation it will help us as we think about the upcoming local government elections. I think it was very clear that power seeking dominated policy seeking. However, there were nuances in the balance between power-centric and policy-centric agenda. The rationale was to unseat the ANC with the hope that majority power will give these political parties access to advance their intended policies as articulated in the election manifesto. I remember when I was doing my research, I had a conversation with one of the councillors, and it was interesting to hear his reflection. He referred to the DA-led coalition in the city of Johannesburg as a stillborn. He argued that the DA had expectations of using its electoral dominance to influence the EFF into joining forces with them in the coalition. Of course, this didn't happen owing to the fact that the EFF was quite clear from the onset that its act of cooperation was a marriage of convenience and a case of sliding with a lesser devil. But again, in this characterization of it being a stillborn was the lack of preparedness. The lack of preparedness became glaring given that there was no formal and comprehensive coalition agreement to codify basic policy that members would adopt. And Prof. Susan alluded to this earlier, that having this agreement does not guarantee that members would adhere to. If you think about the case of Nigeria in 2019, the coalition of united political parties that was formed actually had a very clear coalition agreement, but that coalition was short-lived. And part of it was because there was a lack of, dispute resolution mechanism, but also a lack of properly defined coalition governance structure. I do need to add, though, that with the city of Johannesburg, there was a dispute resolution mechanism, which in practice appeared to have been ineffective. Now, I think if we want to think about the upcoming elections and around this composition of coalitions, I have a few questions. One would be, how should the voting public be thinking about coalitions? Two, how should political parties be thinking about lessons from the past 5 years in relations to coalitions? But most importantly, given the potential of increased coalitions across the country, in their current state, are they best positioned to improve service delivery? If the answer is no, then what ought to be done to ensure that this new form of governance serves as a tool and a mechanism of change in the lives of South Africans? For the DA-led coalition in particular, ideological battles had an impact in service delivery. The DA policy, which is essentially free market orientated, was presented as the antithesis of the EFF hardline socialist orientated policies. And so despite the DA having vowed to provide comprehensive housing delivery and the EFF provoking mass land grabs and occupation, these different ideologies ultimately hampered delivery. And therefore, I think we can agree that it's evident that unless alliances are better coordinated ideologically and in terms of power objective, endemic power struggles will result. Again, I want to ask, have coalitions improved service delivery and reduced corruption? If the answer is no, how do local municipalities remedy this, given that coalitions are now part of our political landscape? As Professor Ngachane alluded earlier, that this is going to be a reality even maybe for the next decade. So if the answer is no, what do we do? Because I think we can all agree that corruption did not evaporate. It was just decentralized. And this is true for both the DA-led coalition and the ANC-led coalition. So let's think about that, because I think it's an issue of good governance. And I recognize again that coalitions have the potential to help us develop very robust democracies and robust institutions. But again, on municipal level, it's important to think about whether this new form of governance it's not new, I mean, we've seen it even from 1994, whether it has the capacity to improve service delivery and reduce corruption. I'm going to end this, Sam. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There's a couple of questions that are coming through the chat. I will save them for when we're done with this round of inputs. And Crispian, over to you. Thank you very much, Crispian Olva, public policy and management expert.
Thank you, Sam, and a very good afternoon, everyone, and to everyone that's listening in. So I looked at coalitions from the perspective of the municipal administration, the sort of machinery underneath the politicians, and how it was impacted by coalitions. And my focus in particular was on the cities. And as you know, there were a number of coalitions that came in 2016. The bad news is that on the whole, these coalitions had a largely negative impact on municipal administrations. They resulted in less financial viability. There were delays in passing budgets. There was a decline in audit findings. There was a lot of senior management instability with some senior management echelons being completely cleaned out. There were drops in service delivery and citizen satisfaction. And as Bonolo has indicated, there was a rise in levels of corruption. And I was interested in why this was the case. And particularly given that coalitions are going to be part of our political life going forward. So a couple of points. I mean, firstly, coalitions add a level of complexity to the political management of a municipality, and they require quite a lot of maturity to be able to manage them. And in a situation where parties are still learning their way around how to govern, it's often very difficult for them to keep these coalitions on track. And the political instability that arises cascades down into the administration. In particular, the worst part of it is that as these different coalition partners are brokering their deals, they tend to use aspects of the municipality, like budget decisions or contracts that are being awarded, as part of their deal making. And there's a tendency towards more short-term rent-seeking deals, which can obviously undermine municipal governance. So if we're wanting to look at how to prevent that, and particularly for citizens that are wanting to go into these elections with a critical eye, I would say, first of all, we've got to insulate our municipal administrations from political interference. The one immediate reform I think we should be bringing in is to prevent managers from arbitrary political action. The tendency for all these coalitions is to come in and try and clean out the management and get their own point people into the administration. So I think we should move away from having managers on these short-term, fixed-term contracts and rather go for some long-term contract appointments. And we need to put in place some sort of check and balance so that when councils and politicians are acting arbitrarily and unfairly, there's a way of second guessing that and bringing it back to the administration. The other point that Susan mentioned earlier, there's been very few coalition agreements reached by these coalition partners. And what's very important for running a municipality is to have an agreed common program. It might not be your electoral platform that you campaigned on, but some minimum agreed common program that holds the coalition together, which you put in place in terms of an agreement. Because as these conflicts, cascade into the administration, what staff need is a reference point, a sort of checking point that they can go back to and say, this is the basis on which we now need to try and navigate these decisions and move forward. So I'll leave it there, Sam, and I look forward to the questions and the debate.
There's a few of them, and I will move around. We'll share the questions. There's Abba, there's Bunolo, there's Professor Boyson, Professor Ndlekianas, everyone in there. Terry Tselane, welcome, Terry Tselane, very busy man nowadays, the Executive Chair of the Institute of Election Management Services in Africa. How does this sound to you? Have you taken in everything, and how do we relate all of this to current affairs and confusion, legal challenges you've been writing about? And over to you, Terry.
I'm very sorry. But thank you very much, Sam and colleagues. I think today's session, it's a very interesting session, and I think also largely because now we're moving into local government elections and possibilities of having to deal with the coalition in almost all the municipalities. As you will recall that in 2016, we had about 27 municipalities that were hung cancelled. But there is a question that Bonolo has raised, and I want to deal with that particular aspect. That the reason why we have coalitions, in my opinion, it is largely because of the electoral system that we have in the country. As you may be aware that in a first past the post system, a simple majority enable a party that has got the majority to govern. But in a proportional representation system, and where there is no outright winner, it means that the political parties are forced to come together to find some kind of arrangement in order to be able to govern the municipalities. Now, where do we find this in terms of our electoral system? If you go to the Constitution, section 46, subsection D of the Constitution says that the Constitution of South Africa should provide for an electoral system that results in general in proportional representation. Notwithstanding the judgment recently of the in the matter of New Nation movement, where the issue of the electoral system was dealt with, still, even if we have the constituencies at the national and provincial level, the system, as per that provision of the Constitution, must always remain largely proportional. Now, in a case where you don't have one single party that does get overwhelming majority, you will definitely have to have all the political parties working together in order to be able to govern, as I've already indicated. So my argument is that the fact that we have had a single political party dominating the political space, it's actually an anomaly in a proportional representation system. Because proportional representation system, and it's an anomaly, but largely because of the South African context, where you had one political party that was dominant during the struggle, and therefore, due to apartheid and the liberation, that party was seen as having liberated the majority of people. But now, we're beginning to see that the gap is narrowing between the political parties. So the coalition system will always remain in South Africa. In fact, it is a miracle that it does not actually happen at the national level, in the National Assembly and the governance at that level. But as you may be aware that we are moving much, much closer to that situation where now even at the national level, you won't have one single party dominating. So in the municipalities, the likelihood is that in fact the numbers will increase from 27 to cover quite a number of areas, irrespective of who is actually contesting the elections. Now, there is a question that is being asked, and then I know that quite a number of you have focused on this issue of what to do now that we have this arrangement of coalition. You may recall that sometime last year, when there was a problem in Pretoria or in Tshwane, MEC Maile decided to invoke Section 139 of the Constitution, basically by dissolving what he regarded as a dysfunctional council, which is an instrument largely that is used if you are in a position to control the mechanisms for Section 139, to use that as an instrument to try to bring some stability in the municipalities. Now, my view is that having a situation where you dissolve this so-called dysfunctional municipalities and having by-elections is not a guarantee that you will necessarily have different results. It is possible that even if you dissolve a municipality, you call for by-elections, you will still end up with a hung council. So invoking Section 139 of the Constitution to try to resolve the problem because of the coalition, it's actually not the solution. But where is the solution? The solution, in my opinion, can be found in Kenya, where in 2011, the Kenyan political leaders introduced a legal framework that basically regulated coalitions. If you're leaving coalitions to manage themselves, or political parties to manage themselves through the agreements that they have, and then to use the word that is common in relationships, it's what you call, it's a fat and sit. It is so loose. It is so loose that when you are not happy in that relationship, you can just walk out. But where you have a marriage, that is actually formalized through a marriage contract, it is very, very difficult for people to live that kind of a marriage. That's why you'll find many people say, no, I'm here because of the children, I'm here because of this, but it is largely because marriages are regulated, and it is not easy for a person just to walk out of a marriage and then go to another level. So my, therefore, suggestion is that in order to deal with all these other aspects, at a broader level, at a broader strategic policy level, you require to institutionalize this. You need an organization, you need mechanism that will regulate coalitions. And in my opinion, you need something similar to what I refer to as a CCMA of coalitions. You need to have a commission for conciliation, mediation, and arbitration in order to be able to manage the coalitions in South Africa. Because once we've got that particular framework, that framework then will make it difficult for people for political parties just to enter into a relationship and then live as and when they feel like getting out of that kind of relationship. And then you've got to deposit that, you've got to develop this as an independent office, as they've done in Kenya. And then you've got to, once the political parties have made an agreement, that agreement must be deposited with a particular office, and it must be difficult for a political party to get out of that kind of a marriage. Let me end there for now.
Thank you so much, Terry Tselane. We're now moving to Johann Mettler. He's an expert in local government and a former city manager in the city of Nelson Mandela Bay.
Thank you very much, Sam, and some very good contributions from the fellow panelists. I of course look at this from the performance side, from the execution side. As an administrator or an accounting officer, it is my job. It is our job to make sure that the plan of council, that the budget of council, get executed. Now, it is very difficult, as Chippy has indicated, to make that happen within a climate of uncertainty, within a climate of unpredictability. No government can function in such an environment. There are very clear processes in local government. There's a particular time when your budget must be passed, your draft budget must be passed, your service delivery plan must be passed, etc. And council has a big role to play in those processes. So when there's uncertainty, when a council will sit, and if it sits, will it actually deal with the agenda? Then that becomes a problem, and that has largely been my experience dealing with the administration within a coalition setup. Now, of course, in the case of Nelson Mandela Bay, that was not always the case. There was a period when the coalition held in the if I remember correctly, in the 16-17 financial year. But then the wheels started to come off in the following financial year, and that then makes matters very complicated. I can refer you to council meetings that were really slanging matches, shouting matches. You will recall the incident of the jugs that was flying around in Nelson Mandela Bay. Now, it became so bad that I had an arrangement with the speaker to excuse the senior managers from such meetings, because frankly, it was not good for their psychological well-being to sit there and to witness politics taking place. So what's the point? Because I think Bonolo raised it. Is it good for service delivery? We all know that when the elephants fight, it's the grass that suffer. And yes, there is a difficulty with relation to service delivery. You can just have a look at the number of acting city managers that Nelson Mandela Bay has had to date. It's a frightening amount. But now, what to do? Terry has spoken about Kenya. I hold the view that at local government level, one must really try not to have coalitions, simply because of all of the negativity and the difficulties that associate with it, especially in the manner that it is being practiced. So ideally, as far as I'm concerned, it's a view that I hold. It's only a view. But we do have a system of proportionality in our local government system. It's made provision for in the legislation. It makes our Structures Act makes provision that a council does not have to be an executive mayoral system. It can also be an executive committee system. Now, an executive committee system is a proportional system. So you would have the big guys in the room, those that have gotten the 45%, and the one would have 42% or 40%. They would make up the majority of the executive committee. So you would have the two elephants literally being forced to sit around the table and to make something work. That system is currently in place in KZN, where the city of eThekwini then has an exco system, and it seems to work, where the major parties are represented. Once you have the major parties around the table, they are then forced to make it work, because you cannot afford to collapse a council in a case like that, because it will also mean that your items, the items that you are responsible for as a member of the executive committee, would also then suffer in the process. So everybody has some skin in the game as far as that is concerned. So some also call that a grand coalition. And I do think that we have to seriously start thinking of moving into that direction, because if we don't, we're going to see a lot of dysfunction and additional dysfunction in municipalities in the future, and that is a big difficulty that I think that we must anticipate and plan for. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you on that grim note. Very, very concerning analysis. Not that analysis is not good, it's great, but this is what we are dealing with. And I try to look for the silver lining around it and say, perhaps this is some necessary pain that as a nation we have to go through as part of the evolution of our democracy. When you look at the city of Cape Town, it had a coalition. The coalition grew, it matured, it had a single party getting to govern the city of Cape Town. And at the back of my mind, I kept thinking, I don't know if that actually can be applied in the trends across the various cities. Let's now look at a question that comes from Pazamisa. Is the ANC a strong brand or an alliance of needy partners? Here's another question from Richard. It says, given the severe decline in the state of municipal finances, will this not contribute to an even more unstable outlook for coalitions? Could Mkokeli Advisory or Nolo handle the first question? And I'm going to move around as well to invite other speakers to contribute to these two questions. Crispian, Susan, but let's start with Professor Advisory, then Bunolo.
Sam, I missed that question. Maybe
Okay,
Bunolo could. Yes.
Let's take Bunolo. Is the ANC a strong brand or an alliance of needy partners?
Thank you, Sam. For somebody who grew up in the ANC, I think right now I am in a separation. As Dr. Terry said earlier, that it's either a marriage or a fudge and set. Mine, I found myself as a kid in this family. So I decided to say to my family, me, I'm leaving. I will see you later. So to answer the question, I think we can agree that the ANC is no longer a cohesive movement like it was before. Personality politics have played a role in getting the ANC where it is, but also the growing dissatisfaction among citizens when it comes to service delivery, corruption, and yeah, the constant disillusionment of citizens. I think we can agree that the ANC is no longer the strong brand. And I know I've got my own biases, like I said, because I grew up in the ANC. I believe that the ANC was a strong brand, but I don't believe that anymore. But I think where the ANC is at the moment is that I think right now they know that they are losing that image that they had. I seem to think that in the 2016 local government elections, I think the ANC was not paying attention. Like I like to say that we need to learn to read the room, and I think the ANC wasn't reading the room, and which eventually led them to lose the number of municipalities that they've lost. If you think about even the slogan that they used in 2016 was Asnavalo, which basically loosely translates that we really are not worried, right? And so I think right now where they are, they are aware that, they should be worried when it comes to the upcoming local government elections. And what they've done is that they've started identifying political parties that almost share same ideologies with them, that have common messages with them. And they're having conversations with them because they're anticipating that they will definitely not win the 50+1 majority that is required, particularly for the city of Johannesburg and Tshwane. And I think this is different from what it was then, because what it was then in 2016 was that once parties realized that none of the parties actually have got the majority rules, the majority votes that were required, they quickly convened and figured it out. But right now what the ANC is doing, because I think they are aware that they are no longer a strong brand, I think somehow the ANC knows that, things are not working out for them. They're starting to read the room. So they're trying to remedy the situation by identifying parties that they can go into an alliance with. So I agree with this question that I sincerely think that the ANC is no longer the strong brand that it was. And like I said, I have my own biases because I grew up in the ANC, but right now I'm in a separation with them. And it grieves me to say this because I keep wondering, who am I going to vote for? Because it's like now I'm divorcing my own parents, you know, and yeah, I just really think that the movement is not as cohesive as it used to be before. Thanks, Sam.
Can I just mention that, Sam, quickly?
Okay.
A brand presupposes that you have a collective commitment towards a particular binding idea and vision of society. The ANC, in many parts of the country, that kind of ANC no longer exists. It's an amalgam of different factions. They're using the ANC as a source of patronage. They don't give a damn what happens to the ANC because some of them know that they are there for that term or even a couple of years. Johann made a very useful example in reference to Nelson Mandela Bay. Nelson Mandela Bay, the first coalition that worked there was a DA coalition. The ANC coalition, actually, that was led by Mkokeli Bobani. That was pretty much an ANC coalition. And everybody agreed that Bobani was a complete disaster, a complete buffoon, corrupt and everything. But the ANC was happy to have Bobani there because he enabled access to patronage. Illegally, I mean, Bobani was outright about, he didn't care to impress. Where are the tenders coming? Appoint this person, appoint that person. And the ANC allowed Bobani to run amok because they too ran amok as MMCs in their own portfolios. And he kept on changing acting city managers because they couldn't play ball. I mean, Johann was calling for order. No, things have to be done properly. And Bobani is like, to hell with properly. This is how these things are going to be done. And they fired Johann simply because he just wanted things to be done properly. The only time the ANC then objected to Bobani and eventually voted him out in collaboration with the DA was when the city was really collapsing. And then they realized that, damn, this is going to get us into trouble as well because we are eventually going to be held responsible for this. I mean, the city was literally not running debt and everything. And so it's only when the problems at the municipality threatened prospects of the ANC being elected as a majority party. So it was purely for selfish reasons. So they didn't care about, better life for all. To hell with better life for all. There was no care for better life for all. It was all about their own life. So the idea then of a brand really depends on the party that still has a collective vision of society, commitment. But the ANC, especially, and to really understand the ANC, literally how Cyril Ramaphosa's speeches give us a false picture of the ANC. To really get to grip with the nature of the ANC, you have to go into communities. That's where the real mess is, yeah?
Oh my goodness, what happened there? I'm trying to figure that out. Failing which we move to Amuzweni. If I can't get it. No. Can you see my second phone? Can you see my second gadget?
Thanks, then. Should I go ahead?
Please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. I do think that our conversation today is showing that, coalitions and alliances actually do get a very bad reputation. And I think that maybe some of the work that we need to think through is how we revamp the reputation of coalitions and alliances. so that indeed we can work towards improving the quality of our democracy. You know, when Bonolo and Mkokeli speak and also speak about the different experiences of the ANC and other political parties and coalitions, and Johann speaks about, you know, jugs being thrown around, it is important in our own minds as a society and also in the minds of political parties and their leaders to remember that we do have a learning electorate, right? We do have a discerning electorate, and that at some point, people are going to learn the tricks, right, that political parties and their leaders actually do, and possibly even reject them at the polling stations. And so with this particular context, in the context where there's just such shifting electoral uncertainty, can we really then ask, and can we really say that generally political parties are learning, right, to work out coalitions and alliances in a better way? And in fact, can the ANC itself, you know, revamp itself and learn how to manage, how to negotiate coalitions and alliances? And really, my chapter looked at this. It looked at, it asked the question about, can coalitions work and under what conditions coalitions really work? And what I did there was to look at an international perspective. I took a couple of European countries, and I also took a couple of African countries. And the big lesson in what I found was that coalitions and alliance making, political parties must take coalitions and alliance making as a long-term political party strategy. Failure to do so means that these parties themselves may, in fact, end up being relegated politically. And we have seen that this, in fact, has actually happened. This has happened to political parties that stood by themselves, right, autonomously, and did not participate in coalitions. This has also happened to parties that participated and misbehaved in alliances and misbehaved in those coalitions, where then they became very, they got punished at the next cycle of elections, right? So a good example, for example, is Botswana, where I think it's Botswana's movement for democracy was expelled from the alliance, the pre-electoral pact that Botswana opposition parties had actually made. Britain's own Liberal Democrats between 2010 and 2015 also lost out, right, because they were not vociferous enough in the coalition, that in one of the very few coalitions that Britain actually had. And you also have Germany, right? Germany's Social Democratic Party also, you know, became relegated in the next elections because it had not performed and behaved well in the coalition that it had been part of, right? So what do we understand from this? We do understand that political parties are afraid, right, of a couple of things when they get into coalitions and they get into alliances. One of the things is that they are afraid of being juniorized, right? They are afraid of losing their political identity. They are afraid of losing relevance. And what do they do within that political coalition? They then start to kind of like go outside of what might have been agreed terms and conditions in the coalition agreement and speak against what was the consensus that was built. That in itself, right? I don't think people, and generally people, society and political parties must imagine that nobody's watching, right? That this can actually carry on. So what do we need to really understand? I think for South African parties, right, in the upcoming elections, it is very important for South African parties, and it may be the ANC because I'm still a child of the ANC. It is important for the ANC itself to revamp and learn by practicing smart politics. Smart politics, right, means that it fights to win the election, right? And it also means that perhaps it also works out, right? Better coalition mechanisms, better conflict resolution, better negotiating skills, and less of the issues related to positions and privilege and power grabbing and that kind of thing. That, on the one element for the ANC, can do that, but the failure of the ANC to do that means that opposition parties themselves can also lift good coalition practice as a long-term political party strategy that destabilizes the ANC, that kicks the ANC out, right? By learning to actually cohere, cooperate, negotiate, and actually follow through on exactly the things that they would have agreed to at the coalition negotiating kind of table. So overall, I think South Africa owes itself generally to revamp coalition reputation and to think through coalitions and alliances as a long-term party political strategy of enabling South Africa's democracy not to crumble, of increasing the quality of South Africa's democracy, and to Crispian's point, of actually ensuring that governance takes place, right? So that Johann is not scared to go to meetings and things like that. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Mzweni, for that. Yeah, apologies, I didn't have you immediately where I planned to have you in the original slot. I wonder if Professor Boyson is back online. She dropped a little bit technology, but I'm sure being the geek she is, and she's managed to come back online. Professor Boyson, any input from you? Generally, are we expecting coalition governments to see a lot of them in the coming election? What are the prospects for 2024 at national level, also in Gauteng?
Yes, indeed. You know, all indications are that the number of coalitions will be increasing after this election. It's an open question as to by how much. But yes, in the municipalities, we have seen, interestingly, the ANC did return to power in the previous term, in a term that's ending now. In by-elections, it has been doing well. In subsequent politics, it has, the last 2 weeks or so, it has really been embarrassing itself and probably damaged its own brand to the extent that voters are not easily going to forget about the hapless performances and registration bungles, even if those are being glossed over now through the Constitutional Court decisions and advisories. So the ANC, as the pivot of these foreign coalitions and increasing number of coalitions, is in the zone of possibly recovering. And I do argue strongly that the ANC remains a powerful brand in coalition politics, very much so, even if it's a colossus that crumbles and really disorganized and divided and proposing different types of ideologies, different directions of ideologies. It remains a strong brand because it still pulls the bulk of the voters. It still remains there by far, even if it's likely to crumble by a few or shed a few percentage points in forthcoming elections. It will undoubtedly still draw the vast number of votes in these elections. And therefore, it will also still be able to call on national power and much of provincial power in luring other political parties to come and form alliances with it. So it is really still a big force to be reckoned with. But I think we can definitely see an increase in the number of coalitions in the forthcoming elections. Also in Gauteng. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Crispian, any input from you with regards to policy, coherence? What can you see? What can you share with us?
Thank you, Sam. So can I just pick up on Richard's point about the money? He said that surely the decline in city finances is going to contribute to more unstable coalitions, which I think is certainly a good point. But as I indicated earlier, the real impact is that unstable coalitions also have very serious financial implications. The parties haggle over budgets. They don't get the councils convened. They don't pass their budgets on time. And they, have this tendency to, take the municipal contracts and divide it up between themselves and try and extract whatever rent they can out of them. I was particularly taken with Johann's point earlier about an executive committee model. And maybe just, in passing, I want to also touch on Irina's comment. So she asked who fills the positions in the municipality and does the jobs and provides the services. So what we've got at the moment, the legislation creates this thing called an executive mayor. It's actually a bit of a misnomer because the real executive function lies with the municipal manager and the city manager. And with that slight misnaming, we've given the impression to the politicians that they're executive and that they have the ability to go in and run the administrations, to appoint service providers, to decide who gets contracts. And the executive mayor in turn appoints this mayoral committee, and all the members of that mayoral committee strut around thinking that they're in charge of the portfolios, and they start issuing instructions down into the administration. In fact, the system is meant to work very differently. There's a city manager. He accounts to the mayor and council, and he's got to build a relationship with them. And the city manager is the person that appoints the heads of department and the staff in the administration to do the job. So we've got this funny legal situation where we give our politicians the misbelief that they hold executive power, and we appoint people to run the mayoral committee that think they can then take charge of departments and issue instructions and start getting involved in contract management. So we do need a little bit of a reordering of the political sphere in relation to the administration. The message that's got to go out there from the citizens of this country to the politicians is stick to your lane, do the politics, set the policies, make sure council convenes, adopt policies, and leave the administration to do their job, which is to actually run the city, see to the administration, see to proper contracting and supply chain management, etc.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to move around and maybe even take volunteers from the panel. Anybody who wanted to drive a particular point across, Mzweni, Teritselane, Johann, Professor Lekiana, moving around, any burning issues you wanted to bring across?
Yes, let me just maybe jump on the idea that was proposed by Terry when we were speaking about we need a CCMA of coalitions, right? And I think if we all agree that coalitions are not going anywhere, and we all agree that coalitions are uncomfortable for the political parties that necessarily enter into them, then we must agree that we must have sharp, focused, responsive, and also reactive kind of like coalition management tools that are effective, right? Because like Christian says, coalitions that don't work are expensive. They cost money, right? They're expensive also in terms of service delivery, right? So when we are talking about a coalition agreement, right? Perhaps we need to move away from the kind of coalition agreements that are MOUs, just generic memorandums of understanding, right? That kind of like set out the broad scope of the parameters and agreements that the parties agree to, right? And move towards maybe more legally binding, right? Legally binding and possibly punitive coalition instruments that ensure, at the very least, in an 18-month span or a 24-month span, these political parties are going to do everything they can to make the coalition work and to make the running of the city, metros, and so on actually carry on, right? So that citizens themselves are just not victims of the fact that people are throwing around jars, right? So coalition agreements are something that really need to be taken forward and taken forward seriously. And I also then think that dispute resolution mechanisms and dispute resolution mechanisms that are embedded within administrations, right, across and within political parties, because we know that there's inter-party kind of like conflict as well as intra-party conflict. So what you would have, what you would need is very vibrant, robust committees that allow people to sit through, work through their disputes in a way that does not actually, maybe create festering conflict that eventually kind of like disrupts and dissolves a broader kind of like coalition. And to Mnebisi's point, and I think the Mnebisi point that the point that Mnebisi made about the chap that was allowed to do whatever, is that at national level, political parties can see what's happening at local government level. It's just that it may be expedient for those political parties, right, and their leaders at national and provincial level, right, to ignore the dynamics and the disputes and the disruptions that are happening at local government level. And so it's important, right, for them, it's really important for them to move away from that kind of like strategy, right, of ignoring and thinking and saying, okay, it's down there, it's happening there, right, and actually intervene within political structures at provincial and national level on what is happening at the local government level. You can't just have, your party representatives running amok, at local government. So it's really essential, right, for provincial leadership and national leadership, if it's not too busy squabbling amongst itself, right, to make sure that things are happening and things are resolved at kind of like your local government level. I'm going to pause there. Thanks.
Just quickly,
Sam.
Terry, are you going ahead? Unmute yourself there.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I wanted to make a follow-up because this is a very important point that has been raised here. To say, we all agree that coalitions are here to stay. And then I've already indicated that, in fact, the electoral system in the country makes it necessary that you have coalitions. So coalitions are going to be there. But here are two divergent motives in the coalition. Political parties are entering into coalitions for self-interest. Almost the same self-interest that you saw, and I think this was emphasized by Professor Mkokeli as well as Susan in their presentations. So it's almost a similar thing that we experienced during the so-called flow crossing. When individuals were moving from one party to the other, it was never really about policy or service delivery or anything. It's always about self-interest. But we as citizens, on the other hand, expect coalitions to work for us in terms of service delivery, stability, and governance. And then these two things won't happen because they are divergent. And then we, the citizens, are not in government. Those who are in government and managing the coalitions are the political parties themselves. So we have left basically the self-interest or political parties to manage their own self-interest and individuals who serve in those particular political parties. And then we get surprised when there is instability. I mean, if you look at Nordic countries, there are coalitions in Nordic countries, but there is stability in those areas. I mean, you look at Germany, for instance. Germany has been in coalition almost forever, but there is stability. Why is it that here in South Africa, we are unable to have stability in our arrangements? Well, firstly, maybe it's because of inexperience, but the most important thing that then we need to do is to basically regulate. We must regulate those relationships such that it is impossible for political parties to just follow their self-interest in a coalition, that they are able to then deal with the issues that are there, which are the issues that we expect them to do, which is that of governance, all the issues that Crispin and others have been raising, and Johann, in terms of the kind of the difficulties that are there at the local level. But for as long as we leave it to the political parties for them to get together and say this is our agreement, those agreements will always service or serve the self-interest of those political parties and not the electorate.
Just quickly, sir, as I was saying earlier, or tried to, part of the reason I love this ethnography and looking at local communities, you come across very hilarious cases. In 2016 at Laingsburg, the Western Cape, there was a party there called Karoo Ontwikkelings Party, abbreviated as COP. It got 220 seats, 220, and became to use Bunolo's terminology, a queen maker between the DA and the ANC, right? So these guys used their 220 votes to secure the mayoralty of this Laingsburg, a very historic municipality, you know, but their candidate, the mayor, passed away. No, he didn't pass away. He was accused of corruption and this and that, and he was forced to resign. And second on the list was a fellow called Johann Mettler. Johannes was second on the list, which meant that he had to be appointed mayor. But the problem with Johannes was that he liked drinking a lot. and his party colleagues were like, no, you can't be a mayor. And you are even staying at home with your mother. You know, the guy used to be a construction worker and he would walk to work, right? So these guys were embarrassed that we have a mayor, this guy stays at home and he's fond of his drink. And I can, you know, already imagine Johannes telling them that you all get drunk. So, you know, what's the fuss about me? So Johannes in Laingsburg, because he was a candidate of COP, he was number 2 on the list, and his party had 220 seats, had to be mayor. Showed up at work drunk, mayor. And but ultimately, and the DA had to tolerate this guy because the guy brought 220 votes. But at some point they decided, you know what, this doesn't work. We can't have a mayor like this. I mean, Johannes just shows up, poop drunk. You know, he's coming to work and he's mayor. You know, but that's how politics. That was the arrangement. Johannes was second in the list. That was a little bit hilarious. Yeah, but all those stories are there in the book.
Can I just come in there from what Dr. Terry has said? So this was part of a research for my master's. So I did interviews with councillors within the city of Johannesburg, and obviously I won't mention which party, but one of the councillors that I spoke to actually confirmed what Dr. Terry just said, because he was like, look, we are the small fish in this pond, so what must we do? For them, it was an issue of power seeking than policy seeking. Literally, the guy said to me, truth be told, I'm not interested in policy. We are struggling. We are councillors in Soweto. We are struggling. We want to survive. And here was an opportunity for us to be part of this arrangement. And we took it. And as somebody who's an activist, I mean, I've been an activist since my student days, and I believe in you know, making sure that we provide service to our people. I was terrified when I realized that, in fact, this game of politics is really just about power seeking. And to have someone, and he kept saying to me, you're not going to mention my name, right? because he wanted to make sure that I don't expose him. And it's true that, you know, some of these smaller parties and some of these councillors actually do not care about what matters. It was just about getting power and being part of the coalition arrangement, and the idea of policy, the idea of service delivery, the idea of ending corruption within the city, the idea of good governance meant absolutely nothing to them, which is quite disappointing.
Okay, let's move to Johann and just get some inputs from there. I'm circling back to Abba. To hear from a national perspective as well, and how what these things mean about our leadership and the future for South Africa, especially in the context of a brilliant op-ed he wrote in the Business Day yesterday. I'm so glad to see him online that he hasn't lost a lot of friends and his passport or ID document in South Africa. Johann, over to you to give us some inputs and throw in a few insights into this conversation.
Thank you, Sam. Sam, I'm not going to pass myself off as a political commentator. There are people much cleverer than I. But I do want to make this point. The coalition politics and coalitions add as far as I'm concerned, a significant additional risk to the ability of municipalities to perform, to actually make a difference in the lives of people, because in the end, that is supposed to be the goal. So if you look at the municipality and you look at the municipality as a train, now we all know that trains run on tracks, two of them, and they run parallel. In the case of municipality, the one track is the administration led by the city manager, as described by Chippy, and the other track is the political leadership. They have to be in sync. They are linked to each other, joined at the hip, but they run in a direction and they run parallel. If those two lines converge or if they diverge, that train will crash. It will derail. That is the cold hard truth. And now you don't need a coalition for a derailment, but it certainly adds to the risk. And the only point that I want to make is that we need to put inclusivity, democracy, and accountability up front when we talk about local government, and make sure that the council represents, or the executive of council represents the broadest possible majority that people have voted in. So as I mentioned earlier, if you have a 47% party and you have a 39% party, that gives you over 80%, 85% or something like that, representation of the electorate. And that is the democracy. Then there's accountability if you can maintain that distinction between politics and the administration. I really hold the view that we should be very, very, very careful and deliberate in this respect. It is obviously too late for this election to think of making an exco system compulsory, where there is not a clear majority of 50+1. So certainly for the next term, the coalition politics will be with us. And personally, I spare a thought for the city managers and municipal managers that must make things work in that context. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you very much. Abba, we've seen you for a while and trying to come to you. Hopefully you're there.
Yes, I'm still here. Thank you very much, Sam. And thank you for having read my op-ed. I think the basic argument I was making there, I was drawing a parallel between Malaysia and South Africa and showing how the politics had evolved. And there's this kind of centrist spectrum of parties that came out from the mothership called UMNO. So it's very much like the ANC. You've had the PAC breaking away, EFF, COPE, UDM, etc. So I think what my sense is what's going to happen, particularly at the national level, is that you're going to have this kind of fulcrum that a lot of other politics is going to be shaped around. Now, amongst the questions that the article raises, that in the Insulamiti scenarios, we're saying that by 2024, the ANC's national vote's probably going to dip below 50%. And then it would need to go into some kind of alliance. And then who it goes into alliance with may be drawn from this broad spectrum. So I think that's the one thing. I think therefore it answers the question that one of your speakers, one of the people raised was, what's the role of small parties? I think small parties still play a role. And I think what Johann's saying is that you're going to have 2 or 3 big parties that come together, have some kind of coalition, but they do play a role. And I think those of us that are old enough can still remember after the 1994 elections, when the whole sort of tallying was happening in the ANC the KwaZulu-Natal provincial legislature. And you had it fairly evenly divided in the ANC and IFP. And this one old character called Raj Bansi, who had the 2 seats that he could move either way. And when the media asked him, who's he going to vote for? And he said, obviously the ANC. I said, but you've been an apartheid collaborator all this while. Will the ANC trust you with that? And he said, don't worry, I'll double cross that bridge when I come to it. So I think sometimes those of us that have grown up with very principled politics need to also get a bit of a wake-up call that from what you're saying, these are very practical things. People are trying to work out how they're going to put food on the table, what kind of career they're going to maintain. Unfortunately, this is going to be the reality of politics going ahead. Thanks for the opportunity, Sam, and thanks to the panelists as well.
Thank you, guys. I've been given 15 minutes of grace to wrap this, and I'm going to run through it with speed. You will forgive me. I know Professor Ndekena did respond in the background when we're speaking about the time, but I'm going to go through, and thank you very much to everyone that has been part of this. We're going to go through this 15 minutes, starting with Professor Boyson, 60 seconds wrap of where we are around these issues and any issues you want to put across, and then we'll move to Crispian quickly.
Thank you very much, Sam. I really want to reinforce the point that we have to look at the ethics of party politics and the strategies of party politics. And when you get to coalition governments, that governance has to take preference, and political parties need to ensure that their councillors across the country actually put at the forefront the interests of stable governance, and that party politics does not get superimposed on coalition politics, that coalition politics, when these parties are jointly in government, does not become another forum to conclude the election battles that were not won the first time around. So here political parties absolutely have to assume that responsibility, and provinces should make sure that they do not abuse that administration mechanism, because that is an elastoplast over a deep, deep wound. It needs to be corrected, and it needs to be seen for opportunistic party politics across the board for all political parties, and that there must, in the second place, remain accountability, and that micro parties and 1 or 2 council member parties do not get elevated into major power positions in councils. That's part of the points that also relate to the general concepts that Johann used here. And absolutely accountability and proportionality. That is a big theme in the book, also in the piece, for example, by Professor Pierre Vos in one of the chapters in the book, that looks at that executive committee system, and that in the next few years, before coalitions get even more out of hand than they have become, that we put together the necessary legislative frameworks in South Africa to regulate coalition governments, because we are going to see them increasingly as we move ahead. Thank you, Sam.
Okay, thank you so much. The contributions on the chat, and they're moving. Richard interacting over there beautifully with Pazamisa about the role SALGA should play. I'm moving to you, Crispian, and then Buno.
Thank you, Sam. So a lot's been said, but just to pull out the main points that I think we should take forward. The one is this proposal around some form of coalition agreement that establishes a minimum common platform that holds the coalition together, and which civil servants can refer to in the instance of disputes arising within the coalition. Secondly, there's the proposal Johann made around some form of executive committee arrangement so that everyone is represented in the mayoral committee in proportion to the seats that they hold in council. And I think that would be a brilliant way of stopping the horse trading that takes place over mayoral committee posts. Thirdly is the importance of protecting municipal managers. And earlier, I think it was Amuzweni who proposed the CCMA arrangement for coalition governments. I think we need some form of similar independent check and balance so that when managers are being unfairly targeted by political parties in a coalition, there's a public service commission or some sort of local government structure that can intervene and say, no, you can't fire that person. They're appointed legitimately. They've done nothing wrong. Keep them in their post. It's criminal that we are not protecting good administrators in local government and seeing them just get hounded out because they stick to their knitting and they don't follow political instructions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Manolo?
Thank you, Sam. I think again, I'll go back to the city of Johannesburg. I think while the DA was consumed in the dichotomies of power dynamics within and outside of the coalition, unknowingly and knowingly, they compromised on governance and on service delivery. So I think if this is something that we can learn from that experience, is that we need very clear power sharing mechanisms. Two, we need better coordinated ideologies in terms of alliances need to, develop better coordinated ideologies in terms of power dynamics. But again, and this is something that both Amwe and Crispin has said, I think the idea of having a legally binding provision that ensures that coalitions are governed effectively, because then if there isn't this legally binding provision and legally binding mechanisms, then everyone can do as they please. So I think that's one of the takeaways from me, that the need beyond coalition agreement and the need beyond dispute resolution mechanisms to looking at legally binding provisions, but also figuring out very pragmatic mechanisms on how power must be shared among these different parties, these multiple parties with their own different political ideologies and agendas and identity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And moving to Amuzweni Ngoma, researcher in political economy at MISTRA.
Also, you finally introduced me. So thanks, Sam. I think that I think we really have to talk about the quality of the coalition experience, right? And in talking about the quality of the coalition experience, maybe at this current juncture, we can't necessarily depend on political parties themselves to do that, right? So I think maybe if we move towards the question that was asked about what can SALGA do, right? I think we need information, education, and communication strategies, right? That teach and create awareness amongst the electorate about what coalitions are, how coalitions work, and what they really should do if they are, running government. I think that kind of like just removing the veil of understanding this kind of like very specialist area and ensuring that the electorate generally understands what coalitions and alliances really are will probably go a long way in terms of just ensuring that there's more increased quality of experience in those things, in those coalitions. So the kind of like concrete mechanisms and tools within administrations, and also an educated, discerning kind of electorate that is able to hold and ask the right questions of coalitions and their party representatives when things are going wrong. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Terry Tselane. Parting short.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think there is an agreement. Coalitions are here to stay. They need not affect governance negatively. Let us institutionalize them and regulate them in order to ensure service delivery and stability in governance.
Thank you very much, Johann. Johann Mettler, local government.
Yes, Sam, I would like to say that I am covered. I'll just add one little aspect. We must also take care not to reinvent the wheel. We do have a very good regulatory system in local government. The roles and responsibilities of the administration and of the politicians are quite clearly set out. The only thing that is that's not there, and which unfortunately cannot be regulated, is the requirement of good faith. And sometimes it's the absence of that will scupper the best intentions. But otherwise, I agree that there needs to be protection for the administration, that there should be a longer shelf life for senior managers, because there would need to be a stable administration, despite what may happen at the political level. So thank you, Sam, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Professor Ndejana.
Two quick points from me. I think that this is very useful to the extent that it also tells us about the evolution of institutions. That even though we would want to have this instant remedy to this problem, I'm not sure if we could have it as quick as we wish it to be. For instance, the fact that in KZN you have an executive committee arrangement instead of an executive mayor is partly because of KZN politics. I mean, KZN from 94 onwards had a coalition set up, even in the 99 elections. So when 2000 came, it was taken as the tradition of the province to have a coalition, because they were given this option in 2000 that you either choose executive or you choose a committee or you choose mayor. In their case, it was a logical evolution or step to have the same coalition set up at a mayoral level as well, because I mean at Tokini level, because we did not have a majority party. So practices evolved over time, local political culture. These things help to bring about certain institutional arrangements. Whereas in a province where the ANC was always dominant, you would not have had, and in fact, you did not have, because they were in charge. Why go into an executive arrangement when you are in charge? So that local histories evolved over time is important in bringing about institutions. You don't just snap your finger and it comes about. Secondly and lastly, is that I fully support this idea of institutionalizing these coalition agreements. That too is an indication of how our politics is evolving. In that initially we tended to have a lot of distrust for institutions because we inherited these institutions, and we needed to change them quite dramatically to serve the new democracy. And so because we distrusted these institutions, we then vested a lot of power in the individual leaders. So partly because they were liberation heroes, and we thought they would not do any ill, any bad thing. These are honorable people that we trusted. But over time, with the erosion or corrosion of our politics, the former leaders, former heroes have turned into villains, and we are now realizing that, in fact, institutions are the best defense against abuse of power. Yes, we can love individuals, and at some point they may have been very good individuals. But the point is, for any good government to work, for any public institutions to function, you've got to rely on rules and strengthen the institutions, so that whoever comes into that institution will not always have saints as leaders. So our safeguard against abuse of power are institutions. And now we are realizing that. And with this coalition, we need to formalize those arrangements and not trust that each party will follow or will adhere to the pre-election arrangement that they would have signed up. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much to everyone who's taken part and the people joining us on the various platforms. We will carry some of this on the websites, and there will be a report circulated through the links that you've already have, and through the newspaper, the Sunday Times itself. To our partners at MISTRA, the IGD, Sunday Times, Arena Events, and Mkokeli Advisory, in particular, my associates at Mkokeli Advisory, Kuseleto, Matlala, Sanusha, Arena, Mfobe, Richard, Sipokazi, Mistra, Amara, Professor Boyson. Thank you so much for making this a possibility. Thank you.